Have quorum. Just inform members that mobile devices are permitted provided they are muted and on airplane mode, and tablets and laptops should be used for committee business only during the meetings. Welcome everybody to our fourth meeting of the Democratic Scrutiny Committee. Apologies. Oh, John. Okay. Declaration of interest then. Can I just remind members that you're obliged to declare any relevant financial or other interests. If anyone has any interest to declare, they should do so at the start of the relevant agenda item. Draft minutes. Can I refer members to the draft minutes of proceedings at page 6 of your pack and ask if you are content that the draft minutes of our last meeting, 29th of February, are a true reflection of the proceedings? Content?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thank you. Matters arising. Can I just inform members that contact has been made with the clerk of the European Scrutiny Committee at Westminster regarding a visit by the European Scrutiny Committee here on the 21st of March. That's a Thursday. It's likely that a meeting will take place immediately following our committee meeting, and details will be confirmed closer to the time, but members should hold up until 2 p.m. in their diaries. Okay. Moving to item number 5 then, the current proposed EU legislation and the briefing from the Executive Office. Can I just inform members that Tom Reid, Deputy Secretary of Intergovernmental and International Relations in the Executive Office, Stephen Hamilton Shields, who's the Assistant Director, Post-EU Exit Coordination Group in the Executive Office, and Kerry Curran, Director GB and EU Trade Division, Department for the Economy, are going to brief the committee on proposed EU acts in the legislative process. Can I just refer members to the Secretariat paper at page 13 of your packs. The written overview from the Executive Office at page 15 of your packs, and a table detailing proposed legislation submitted by the Department of Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs is at page 3 of the table pack. So correspondence received yesterday, page 15 of the table pack, from the Director of the British Dental Association in the North regarding a proposed EU regulation on mercury dental amalgam. Can I advise members that the committee will consider this regulation in more detail following the, if you forgive my pun, the oral briefing? Just can I welcome officials to the meeting, and just before I ask officials to brief the committee, can I advise members that not all departments have submitted returns for inclusion in the table provided by the Executive Office. The Department for Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs return was submitted late, has been tabled, and no information has been submitted by the Department for the Economy, though an official is in attendance. Can I ask officials, should that be read that there aren't any proposals in the EU legislative system for the remaining departments?
I think I wouldn't read it like that, Chair. It would be a matter of things clearing through the system in time for us to come back to us to put it to you for today's meeting, but we'll continue to follow up on that and get further information to you.
Okay. Yes.
Chair, I think, bearing in mind that as we progress through this, there are circumstances where we've got 5 days. I think it doesn't really augur well that at this stage already departments are not submitting what we need them to submit in the way we need it submitted or on time.
Okay, and that point is taken, and without defending the departments, this is information I suppose that we have asked them to put together in a short period of time that we wouldn't normally be asking them, but I do take your point, and hopefully we'll have a proposal once we have the briefing in terms of getting fuller information. Just can I inform members that the Department for Infrastructure's list of legislation appears to be more or less a direct lift from its answer to an Assembly question, which asked for details of EU laws referenced in Annex 2 of the Protocol, which impact the work of the Department for Infrastructure. So this information wasn't, as has been pointed out, requested by the committee. The committee did request details of proposed EU legislation relevant to here that is currently passing through the EU legislative system. So I suppose I could ask the officials if the Department for Infrastructure tracks proposed EU legislation and whether there are in fact proposals in the EU legislation system to amend the acts that the department have listed.
Chair, I would be reluctant to obviously give a firm view on another department's assessment. What I can say is we are sense checking all the returns against the ULIT system, and we would anticipate a further response coming to the committee based on that, further information coming to the committee based on our sense check of the ULIT system, what's there and where the legislation or the amendments are coming.
Okay, well, okay, we'll maybe ask some details further. I'm just going to hand over to yourselves now just to provide your briefing, and then members, if we allow the officials just to make their presentation, we'll take questions once they're finished.
Okay, thank you, Chair. And good morning, and again thanks for the invitation to come back to the committee today to speak with you. Today I have Kerry Curran, who is the Director of the GB and EU Trade Division in the Department for the Economy, and also joining me today is Stephen Hamilton-Shields. Stephen's the Assistant Director of the Post-EU Exit Coordination Group in the Executive Office. Liz Loughran, the Deputy Secretary for the Environment and Marine Fisheries Group in DERA, had also planned to be here today, but she had a commitment to appear before the Agriculture Committee this morning. So I understand that Liz has agreed. She's very happy to come before the committee at a subsequent meeting, if members wish. Now, today we aim to provide you with an overview of the current EU legislative landscape as it relates to Northern Ireland and those pieces of EU legislation that are currently making their way through the legislative process. We've provided some material, I know there's a lot there, but hopefully it's been helpful potentially in indicating some of the key areas that are there. And as I said, we're continuing to sense check that against the ULIT system, and we'll provide further information at a later point. I think what really stands out when you look at that overview is that the volume and the breadth of the policy areas there is quite significant. But I would caution that at this relatively early stage in the Windsor framework, we're only 11 months post-agreement. It's really difficult to draw from that list a firm conclusion as to whether the raw numbers or the policy span you're seeing are representative of what would be a normal year. Now, there's another factor behind that, in that we are nearing the end of this European Commission and this European Parliament's respective 5-year mandates. So what you tend to see is that sort of end-of-term bottleneck, very often, which is associated with that sort of increase in legislation. But that then comes up against the reality of capacity, the art of the possible in the limited time that the Parliament and the Commission have now before the end of their mandate. So I've no doubts, despite the list that you're seeing there, that EU officials themselves are looking at that and weighing up the art of the possible in the time that's left. We'll continue to monitor that with departments both here in Belfast and through our Brussels office. Now, following on from that, in the summer there will be decisions for the new commissioners and the newly elected MEPs to make in terms of which of those legislative files would come forward into the next mandate. But also they'll be putting forward their own debut work programme, and that will be setting out their legislative priorities for the next 5 years towards the end of the year. And I think that's an invaluable opportunity in a sense, for a bit of a reset when we look at what the legislative priorities are, what the potential regulations are coming down over that 5-year period, and to really plan ahead in a way that we haven't been able to do in recent weeks, obviously, given where we're at. Now, notwithstanding those caveats posed by sort of where we are in the EU's electoral cycle, there are some key takeaways, I think, from our perspective in the Executive Office when we look at those lists. Firstly, the snapshot you have indicates a legislative horizon that encapsulates a very wide policy span, from vehicle standards to medical devices and all kinds of things in between. Secondly, it also indicates an emphasis on the highly technical. For example, relating to emissions from air conditioned systems in motor vehicles. Previous regulations have dealt with areas from the size, shape, etc. of brake lights and trains. It's tense, so quite often you get a lot in there which is very technical in nature. And I think thirdly, even though Annex 2 of the Windsor framework is far smaller than the total EU acquis, its coverage is sufficiently large and inclusive of substantive legislation, not just technical but substantive legislation, to indicate there will be plenty there to keep any administration busy across the calendar year. Fourthly, at any one time, there's likely to be a significant mix of competence in play. Some of those policy areas will be reserved, some will be within the competence of the devolved administration, and others are going to be a mix of the two. So I think it's important to recognise that as well. Next, I think it's important to pick up on one of the issues flagged at the last briefing, and that is going back to the volume that you see here. The policy expertise required, the timetabling, which is outside of our control in terms of when the legislation is planned to move forward in Europe, all coincide to put additional pressure on capability and capacity across next, and it'll be the same in terms of the committee and the Assembly's role as well. We anticipate that's going to be felt right across next policy units, our economist teams, our legal advisors. And as I said before, it's important we recognise that and we find a way of working together to ensure, and that's across departments and with key stakeholders, to find a way to ensure that the process works and the implications of new or amended regulations here is fully understood and factored in. And I think that'll go back to the point with the Commission's new work programme later this year. That is an invaluable opportunity to start to target into those areas. In terms of capability and capacity, I did draw attention last time as well to some of the things that we are doing to improve that. None of them is a silver bullet. We recognise that, and it's a process of continuous improvement. However, the key point we made, and we'll continue to make it again, is that early engagement with the EU's legislative process is absolutely critical here. The earlier we get on and understand the implications, start to work with people, the better. So I think for the best possible chance for next to get in the front foot, the earlier we consider these issues, the better, as I say. Now, as previously mentioned, and just in drawn to a close in these remarks, the Executive Office assists other next departments in that work through our coordination of horizon scanning assets and various forum. Now, that includes the office in Brussels itself. It's a small office. We work very, very closely with Whitehall colleagues. We work very closely with colleagues in Brussels. We work very closely with colleagues in Dublin, and it's all about sharing your understanding of what's coming down the line, what are the potential implications. So we have an environment or an ecosystem here in which a lot of people have similar interests in understanding what's coming down, where the potential implications are, and we can share those. And just as a final reference in that regard, in developing the ULIT system, for example, we looked at what were the EEA countries, what were the EFTA countries doing in that space, because similarly they need to be able to track legislation and understand what it means. So there are also those groups that we can work with through the Brussels office to build up our understanding of what's happening in the sense check that. So I'll draw the opening remarks to a conclusion there. Chair, hope that's been helpful. And again, thanks very much for the opportunity to come up, and we're very happy to take questions.
Yeah, thank you. Can members just indicate to the clerk if you want to ask a question? Can I just start, Tom? Thank you for coming along and for presenting to us. You kind of finished there talking about early engagement with the office in Brussels. In terms of the departments, we're obviously no longer in the EU. Do the departments respond to consultations still? Do you have the capacity to do that? And responding to stakeholders who may come at an early stage, raising issues? How do the departments deal with that? And do they have the capacity to deal with it sufficiently?
We're at a very early stage, and I'll ask colleagues to comment on that in a second. We're obviously in a very early stage in this particular process. We had the briefing from the committee, for example, on their work programme, their annual work programme, was a start of a process with the Commission, to get as much early warning as possible about what was coming down the line. And there were various stages within that. So you have the policy proposals, you have the pre-consultation, you have the consultation, you have the development of the regulation, etc. And very strong message from the Commission to the departments in that the earlier you get in that cycle, the better, because as you start to go forward and your policy proposals become more concrete, your regulations start to develop, you're in an environment where there are 27 member states with interests, not just ourselves here. And it becomes much, much more difficult to change direction in that context than it is at the start to be ensuring that your issues are understood. It was very much looking ahead. This is now the new norm. How do we make this new norm work? rather than where we're at now at the end. And there was a recognition from the Commission at that point that we are at the end of a work programme, and therefore there's more limitations for that kind of strategic level early engagement itself. Beyond that, obviously the engagement with Whitehall colleagues, the engagement with Dublin is very important as well, because these are all issues they are looking at. They have teams in place as well. So the more we're sharing that information, the better. Kerry, I've just turned to you.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. And apologies for my croaky voice today. I suppose from the Department for the Economy's perspective, and it's important to divide where we are in terms of current legislation moving through the EU versus what's coming down the track. And actually looking at what's maybe sort of already on the books might be a helpful way to divide it up. And there are a number of key files that the Department for the Economy, while not having full devolved responsibility for these areas, that we've been engaging with the UK government and the EU and key stakeholders with quite strongly. And just to note a few of those, and apologies that they're probably actually on your list, but not marked down solely against the Department for the Economy. So it's the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, the Eco-Design and Sustainable Product Regulation, deforestation, the Critical Raw Materials Act, and a relatively new area is around the AI Act. And looking at the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism as a particular example, it's useful to consider that this is a major file that will be cross-cutting in its impact across Northern Ireland. So we've been working with the Executive Office and colleagues in DAERA and elsewhere to try and determine what the impacts might be in Northern Ireland. But in reality, we're at a stage in the development of that piece of legislation where even the UK government and the EU haven't determined yet what the potential impacts will be in Northern Ireland in terms of whether the application will take place under 13.3 or 13.4 in reference to this committee. So we're engaging where we can and certainly feeding in the views of stakeholders and potential implications to those colleagues in UKG and indeed in the EU, so that they're aware that there will potentially be issues here for Northern Ireland and we need to take those into consideration. But it isn't fully within our purview to actually make changes or amendments to that. But we're at a relative stage of that piece of legislative work going through the EU that we certainly are engaging and will continue to engage. And then looking at the AI Act, that's a relatively new area for us, both for the UK government and for the Northern Ireland Civil Service. So we actually, for both UKG and ourselves, we haven't developed a lot of capacity in relation to AI at a policy level. So we're all working through a relatively new space together, which is, I think most of the EU member states will be in a similar space because it is a new area of technology. And that does involve a lot of discussions and engagements with colleagues in Whitehall and through the Brussels office with folks out in the EU. And that ongoing engagement and collaboration and consistently raising the potential impacts for Northern Ireland, and really we're at a stage where a lot of this will be potential because we don't actually have the trade data to really clarify what the potential implications of new and developing areas of legislation and regulation will have on our actual sort of like movement of trade. So we use sort of best endeavours in terms of looking at the information available to us and constantly engaging where we see a potential for impact, so that at the very least at each stage, whether that's at UKG or the EU level where actual responsibility for these acts lie, that the Northern Ireland question is very much taken into consideration.
And just in terms of the engagement, or for clarity, will that mean departments officially respond to EU consultations? Is that part of the...
So that's probably looking to the future. So actually consultations on the likes of the areas of legislation already coming through this period of time. So the ones I've mentioned there in terms of Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism and the others, those consultations, a lot of them have already taken place. We're beyond that point, so it's about collaborative engagement to inform and improve our knowledge, as well as ensuring that those making the decisions, which, to be clear, doesn't actually sit within any next department, that they're informed about potential Northern Ireland piece of work. But looking to the next legislative period for the EU and the potential implications for Northern Ireland, I'm quite sure where there are key files that will have an impact on Northern Ireland, we'll be garnering enough information and putting up some resources behind that within our departments to ensure that we're informing at that consultation stage what our specific role in where that consultation information goes into, whether that's via UKG, those formal routes. I'm not entirely clear because we haven't reached that point yet, but we'll certainly be ensuring that the information that we have will be placed in the system so that it's at a useful juncture, and as Tom says, the earlier the better, because that's the opportunity to really influence. And in reality, as these files are mooted, those conversations need to be had almost before the consultations come out. That's where you will actually have the best effect in ensuring that the Windsor framework implications are taken into account.
Okay, thank you. David?
Thanks very much, Chair. Probably just initially to go back and say we've already discussed, some of the information not been forthcoming and some of it coming in late. But I think in terms of what has been included, I think that there's some have done it better than others. I think it'd be fair to Dara, even though their stuff was late, that actually what came through then was probably more helpful to members, I think, in showing us, alerting us to what concerns were and so on. I think DFI haven't provided the title of or link to a single proposed EU Act, and with that it leaves members basically to trawl through EU websites to try and find the regulations in question, which is not ideal, especially given the volume. And I understand that there are challenges for departments in capacity, although I think that's what I would be very concerned about. And I'm not saying that this is what you're doing, is sort of preloading the excuse for when there is failure there. I think that's very much something that needs to be come to terms with, and if there's a need to build capacity, we need to look at how that can be done, because this is going to be a significant role of this Assembly and of the Executive going forward. So we need to build that capacity, but certainly in terms of what information comes forward and how it's of use to members, I think it needs to be presented better than we've seen from some of the departments. And I think in this instance, particularly DFI, I realise everybody's coming to terms with that, but I just think we should have on record that we need as much information as possible around that. I think talking about engagement with stakeholders and so on, I would want to see where the Executive Office or different departments have had engagement with stakeholders, and if there's concerns raised, that they are flagged with members so that we are able to take that into account in deciding whether something needs an investigation or not. I also think probably we need to be a bit clearer on timescales so that we can prioritise accordingly. I think the departments haven't necessarily, again, DFI necessarily been as clear as they can be on that for the moment. And in some proposals of the domestic legislations needed to transpose the regulations, and it'd be useful for the departments to confirm as part of their assessment where competence lies for that, whether it's take health, whether it's with our department or whether it's with the Department of Health and Social Care in that instance. Moving on then to just the table and the breadth of it, I think, and I can go through a number of them more substantively, but in general I think there's a lot in here that has the potential to concern a number of elements of our local economy. Because we don't have the fuller detail, it's difficult for us to know. That will likely, and certainly from our point of view, I think this committee does need to continue to monitor most of this. Now, a lot of it can be grouped together by sort of themes and departments, but I think it's important that we continue to monitor it. And but it does. What we don't want to be doing is calling investigations needlessly if those fears could be allayed at an earlier stage. And so, in asking for that information, that's really what I'm saying, is that if we have the information, we can avoid going through those processes needlessly. But I do, for the moment, I just want to flag that in most of the areas that are flagged us today, I would have concerns that local businesses and industry could be significantly affected. And unless I have information that suggests otherwise, and those fears are allayed by stakeholders through engagement with the executive, I would be proposing that this committee would have to continue to monitor those.
Picking up on the first point in terms of how the information is shared with the committee, as I said last time, we can use this process to get the feedback to make sure as we're going forward, the committee's getting the information it needs and getting the information it needs in the format. So we'll certainly take away those comments and engage departments on that. I think back to where we are now and the fact that there's a lot there, an initial look at that, your reaction is that's potentially got an impact. Again, we're in that end of term space with the Parliament. As we move forward, I think that forward look will be a lot easier. What I would say in terms of the consultation in EU policy legislation tends to be, I think, a lot more extensive in terms of the stages than sometimes we see within Northern Ireland. So you tend to have call for evidence, pre-consultation, etc., stakeholder engagements before you get to the consultation stage. What we can do, I think we can map that out for the committee, and that will give an indication then when you get into the next work programme at the earliest stages where we can start to get involved in some of this, because a lot of the questions I think we would probably have, or anyone reading the table would probably have, are questions which, if they're asked at the start of a process, you're possibly getting the reassurance you need that these are being addressed. Whereas at this point, there's just so much here, you can see why it could be quite difficult looking at that and trying to understand which of these have the most significant impact potentially on Northern Ireland, or do they have an impact?
Some of the talks about the implementation periods, and in terms of the relevancy to the decision making of this committee, I'm aware that it's from adoption, and we need to be pretty quickly to make decisions on some of those things. If they're more urgent, some of those, if we catch them earlier in the process, it's a different matter. But it's just in terms of timescales and so on, and that's particularly what I'm concerned about. Yeah.
I wonder, at the last meeting of the committee, Aidan had suggested, for example, a visit to Brussels to do some briefing there on the institutions, how they worked in the context of the committee's work. I think we would very much welcome if the committee wanted to go across to assist you on that through the Brussels office.
Yeah, I think there's an engagement piece coming forward as well.
That's in the pipeline. Saoirse?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for coming today. I've kept my counsel on this committee. This is the first time I've spoken, and this is our fourth meeting. And the reason I've done that is because I believe we're all here in a listening brief. I think it's very clear that we are operating in a sphere where we have not done this before. But what is coming clear to me is that there is an element here of capacity. And some of the thoughts that I've had in and around the consistency of the information provided, and I think David has already alluded to that in terms of the information that we get before us, completely take the point, Tom, that we are coming up to the end of a mandate, and therefore that will be reflected in the scale and the quantum of what we have before us. However, that being said, we know that often in terms of the EU, often those pieces of legislation are on the back burner for many years, and then all of a sudden they become live. So I don't think it's a waste of time necessarily to actually study stuff that has been on the back burner for quite a while, because that then could end up informing some of our conversations. In terms of the CBAM and the AI, I think that is something that we do need to absolutely have on a register immediately in terms of the impact to Northern Ireland and what that means. I'm coming to this from a perspective of a glass half full. And it's about solutions for us. It's about trying to work together for the positive, but I do want us to have a relationship with you guys insofar as please always be candid with us. I'm hearing constantly about capacity, and I know it was asked initially, but we are now on week 4 and I'm not hearing anything different. So just in terms of the capacity piece, is there anything we can do for you in terms of flagging that further up, or jointly as a committee saying that it's not about concerns per se, but it's about empowering you guys to make sure that you have the tools necessary, and if they're not currently there in the guise that we need them to be, how do we move to a place where we can actually make sure that we're all confident around the table that we're able to do the job of work that we're tasked to do?
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of capacity, it's a subject we have raised numerous times. We continue to push that both with UK government and with the Commission. And it's not from a point of view of please, give us additional capacity. We'll always be pleased to have additional capacity. But it's the recognition that what you're dealing with here is so complex and so wide ranging that you can't leave it to one organisation, one civil service to do that work. We're all in this together and we have to be working together. And I have to say, it has been a fairly positive experience over recent months in that space. I think we're seeing much more collegiate working than maybe we saw in the past, out of necessity. I think then, beyond that, it's as I say, it's not unhelpful recognising that capacity issue, but it then comes back to, well, how do we make the best of the resource that we have? And there is a bit of a learning experience, even coming here today, for example, and providing the information to the committee. That's invaluable. It's a learning experience for all of us. We have a better understanding now of what the committee wants, what the committee needs, and we can continue to look at that. And the point that you made, Saoirse, about the working together, I think is a key message. When we talk about capacity, it's not in terms of limiting expectations as to what we can provide. It's back to that point. The only way we can work with this is we all work together in this space, and that's really the key message.
I suppose just in closing, absolutely, I agree with that wholeheartedly. I suppose where the rubber hits the road is that whenever it comes to the timings, and the constraints that we'll all be under, and the constraints that you guys will be feeling from your side and Nick's, but also the constraints we'll be feeling as a committee, insofar as wanting to take seriously the job of work that we have, and the fact that we don't have all the competency around this table, great as I'm sure we all are, we don't. And that's the top and bottom of it. And we want to make sure that we are being able to get the information in a way that we understand as best we can, ahead of time as possible, so that we can get things at a stage where we can, as you say, have those conversations with various stakeholders, so that we can possibly see things off at the pass. But I think we all just want to feel confident. And you're absolutely right, it is still early days, but I'm just aware that there will be a time where it will cease to be early days, and that could come quicker or later, but we just want to make sure that we've done the right thing. And
just by way of reassurance, we do continue to make the case for specific additional resources in this area. And I think, Kerry, you probably had wanted to come on that point.
No, thank you, because I think it's a really great point, and I think the issue of capacity, and I'd also say capability, is one that we need to bring together. And of course, as Tom says, new resources are always gratefully received in order to help us move things forward quickly. But the issue isn't just about numbers of people sitting in seats to furnish this work. Yeah. It's about the capability. And these are, as you look at that long list of files, and many of them are areas where in the past we haven't had anyone looking at them because they've been a UKG competency, and we're trying to build up capability as well as capacity, and I'd actually say the capability piece is the bigger issue. When we're looking at taking, for example, energy colleagues who have been working in energy in a certain way from a certain perspective, and over this quite recent period of time, having to build up a knowledge around how EU legislation works, which is a very specialised area, it's complex, as I'm sure the committee will understand going through the list of files. So it does take time to build capability. It isn't just about numbers. And I think for the Department for the Economy, it's maybe worth saying that, yes, we're relatively new in this system, but what we have done is we've been preparing for this being the point of time where we'll reach where we'll need to actually deliver on the Windsor framework and all of the elements within that, including furnishing the needs of this committee. And we've established, and it's just went through our board last month, a systems and processes branch, which is helping us as a department to understand exactly where information will be coming in from, who needs to deal with it, and how we support colleagues, both within our department but also across NICS, because so many of the files that we're working on are cross-cutting files, and linking all of that information together. So for me, certainly, sort of the critical element isn't just about capacity, it's about capability and collaboration. And I would take that a step further and say that because so many of these areas also weren't within the purview of the Department for the Economy, they're areas that we recognise will have an impact on businesses or how we operate, but they aren't areas which are devolved. So the key for us is making sure that we are also well connected into colleagues in DBT in the UK, for example, and indeed in terms of linking into sort of like some of the policy making fora in the EU. And that's about getting your systems, processes and networks right. And we've been doing all of that capacity building work, if you like, over these past months and years. So we're not starting from scratch, but we are in a relatively new world where our asks of UKG colleagues are relatively new, because this is a new committee. And so far I'd have to say that the colleagues that we work with in DBT in particular have been very understanding of that, and they've worked very well with us, and they've sent some very senior staff over to Northern Ireland to help to understand what the needs of this committee will be, as well as the needs of the department.
Have you found the common frameworks has been useful in any shape or form?
It's been useful, but also it adds a layer of complexity too, and it'll be more useful in some areas than others, but it's just another part of the puzzle. But that getting for us in the Department for the Economy, having our systems and processes right, which we've put an awful lot of effort into, is how we're actually going to bed this down and make it part of business as usual and get the committee what they need. But I appreciate your understanding of the fact that we are in early days, and we're trying to do our best with the resources and capacity and capability that we have.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Declan?
Thanks, Philip. So your reference to the systems and processes branch is a helpful segue into what I was keen to open up. To what extent has there been a discussion led by yourselves, Tom, with the respective departments and agencies about developing standardised systems and processes? So to take the material we have here today, has there been a conversation about how the presentation of the material can be quality proofed and then presented in a uniform way? Meaning that when we receive from one department, we are seeing a template that is going to be utilised by other departments and agencies. So first question is, has that conversation begun? Associated to that, have Economy gone ahead and developed their own bespoke systems and processes branch? Has that been done in consultation with you? If it has, does that commend a pathway that could be commended to other departments? And if so, has that conversation begun? That's to open up.
I'll pick up some of those points initially, Declan, and then first pass to Stephen. on the standardization approach and the engagement around the systems. On the wider capability and capacity piece, we jointly have been taking forward a programme of work now for quite some time with departments, which have been looking at the challenge itself. How do we build that capability across the service? Because some of it's also cultural change in terms of how you work. And part of it, though, is also about the systems for engagement, communication, coordination between TEO and between departments. And I think it's fair to say, Kerry, that what DFE have put in place reflects those conversations, but has also been an exemplar that we've been able to share some of the work, maybe not that particular one, certainly some of the work in this area we've been able to share with departments. We have a regular forum, monthly meetings, formal monthly meetings with departments that allow us also to share that subgroups of what we call the senior user group in this post-Brexit area. We have subgroups of that which look at areas such as capability and capacity. We'll go into more detail and share experience across departments. So hopefully that's reassurance that that work has been taken forward. It is an ongoing process. We don't see this as an end game, as a constant process of improvement and building on it. And I think what I'm particularly pleased about in that work is the relationships that have developed across departments. Those have been fairly much, I think, entrenched, strengthened over the last year in dealing with the challenge itself. And that's why I probably have a degree of confidence that despite the capability and capacity issues we have, I am fairly confident that as we go forward in this process, we'll give it a fairly good stab across the service. But Stephen has been very much leading on the work, engaging with the committee prior to the restoration of the institutions, looking at the processes and the returns, etc. So if you want to.
Yes, and thank you, Tom. Tom's referenced a range of different groups which feed into providing information across departments that would maybe come from yourselves or from other committees. There is an interdepartmental working group specific to this committee that we've set up to ensure that we have the right mechanisms internally so that when we reach or receive any requests from yourselves, that we are in a place to hit the right people to get the information back to yourselves in as timely a fashion as possible. And I do appreciate that there was some delays in elements of the information that was brought to you guys for today's meeting. But we do have another product in production, which will hopefully bring in the whole issue around, for example, hyperlinks that we find very helpful as well. And we will be having that table updated on a monthly basis so that it will have all the information. And if that needs to be augmented or supplemented by further requests from the committee for further information inputs to that table, we'll be able to, I think, respond quite rapidly to that. So yes, we've had the conversations. I think this was the first one that we had to return to the committee. Yes, it was in a format that wasn't maybe as user-friendly as it could be, but hopefully by the next meeting we should be able to have a product that will tick all the boxes that you've referenced this morning.
May I just come back as well? Thank you. And just on the specific example of systems and processes, and you'd mentioned whether or not we are the systems and process branch that we've developed for the Department for the Economy, how we share that information across NICs and whether that style will be replicated. And I suppose I would say that we have developed the systems and process branch very much in informing sort of colleagues across NICs through the SUG, and it works for us. It's a system that works for the Department for the Economy's portfolio, and there'll certainly be elements of that that will be shared and replicated across NICs, but each department will be different in terms of what its systems and processes needs will be. If you take DERA for an example, part of the work that they operate will actually be undertaken by DEFRA, which will be different than the Department for the Economy's experience. So each systems and processes by department will need to be bespoke by its nature, but we're certainly working very strongly together to share best practice and what works well. And again, I've come back to the fact that this was quite a new process, so we're quite happy to learn from each other and adjust and try and make things better. And share. There's been a lot of sharing of templates and systems and things like that, which kind of helps speed it up across NICs.
It does. It's a really, really important point, that sharing of action, sort of best practice. Now, having said that, prior to 2020, I was in a department feeding into the centre. And sometimes, and Stephen will know this because I think sometimes you get angry phone calls from me around this. Sometimes the templates that came out worked for a department but didn't work for us. You know, so you would have to amend those. So we're very conscious of that, and you build flexibility into it. I think the key for us is how do we then take that information and give it to the committee in a way that is meaningful to you. But as Kerry says, recognising every department is different, and you need the flexibility there in the systems and the templates.
No, I accept completely. There's not one size fits all.
Yep.
So that there needs to be adaptability, flexibility. But one of you touched on I think it was you, Tom, on the issue of culture. Culture can be both a friend and it can be a foe, especially if the culture within a department has become very ingrained, and sometimes personalities who have maybe been there for a long time can be the personification of the culture and how the culture runs. So I make that as an observation. It can be both an enabler for taking a model and then applying it in a pragmatic way. It serves the needs of the department, but also then serves the needs of the interdepartmental working group or the senior users group. On the other hand, there can be resistance because the mindset may well be we need to concentrate on other priorities. And of course, departmental priorities are essential, but there needs to be a way of integrating within set priorities now the systems and the processes that effectively address these issues. So I offer that as an observation. I think it would be useful arising from this conversation, Philip, if Tom and colleagues then are able to share the view and the conversation and the view emerging from this committee that it is important, and it's early days yet, but we need to make haste that we address the issues of effective, standardised, uniform templates coming back to the committee that serves our purposes, but also perhaps brings a greater cohesion then and coherence into how the civil service overall deals with these issues. So my last query then, and it may well be a combination of both, but if we get the apparatus right and we're clear about how these issues are going to be triaged within the civil service, given attention, properly assessed, tracked, and then brought back to here, what's the glue which pulls all of this together? Is it the interdepartmental working group? Is it the senior users group? Or is it both? And ultimately, who is in charge of that? Is it yourself, Tom, or is it another senior civil service manager?
Really good question. I think, in terms of the sort of, we have formal structures, through the various groups that are there. What I would really emphasise, it's the relationships, it's the networks that are even more critical. And I think there's, if we look back at stages over the last number of years where someone has lifted a phone to say, I think there's an issue with this, what do you think? And we have the conversations. And that escalates beyond next to whoever it might need to be. So it's that formal and informal processes are vitally important. And we keep those networks and relationships. In terms of the glue in the system, now we have a role here because we're very conscious that the demands, the complexities, etc., that could come out of this are quite significant. So you need to find a way of coordinating that across departments. So in a sense, we're the glue in that regard, that the request comes onto ourselves, we put them out across departments, we bring those back, we get them to the committee. I think more importantly in that, we're also the glue, in my view, where we have the relationship, we have the feedback, and we take that and we work with departments, we work with yourselves to ensure that as we go forward, the process works for everybody. Because, it's I mean, I said before that in saying about capability and capacity, it's not about managing expectations, but there is a degree there as well, where the timescales for this are so tight that if we imagine teams within departments constantly replying to those and accept huge volumes of information being asked for, that very, very quickly you're into a situation there where departmental capacity is potentially burnt out. So we've got to find a way that this works for everybody. And I think that's where we have a particularly invaluable role to play with the committee and with departments, is how do we make it work? And how do we learn the lessons each time we go through this?
Thank you. Joanne?
Thank you, Chairman. If I can just build on some of the conversation that's gone before, and then I have a few other things I would like to ask, if that's all right. So, yes, I think that, as has been said before, consistency in information is key. And some of the things that I would like to see in there, I mean, of the presentations that we've received, I think the information in DAERA is probably closer to the type of thing that we would need. What struck me from a number of these was that, certainly in the DFI stuff, there's very little around the implication for Northern Ireland. Yeah. And that's key to our work. That's what we need. So kind of bland information about what it is all well and good, but the key factor with that is, okay, well, what are the implications for here? Yeah. And that's what we need. Some of the things another key point is time frame. Yeah. And I'll come to what you said in a minute, Tom, about early engagement. But I mean, there's some of this stuff here on page 17 with regard to the recycling motor vehicles and reusability and recyclability and recoverability. I mean, there's reference there to the timetable for progress through the EU's legislative process is not fixed, but officials advise that the Commission is seeking to agree a final proposal in early 2024. Mm-hmm. We're almost exiting early 2024, so we don't know where that is, and there could be a point at which, as Saoirse has said, boom, we're ready to go. And there's reference throughout some of these to publication imminent. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, Chair, at the point at which something's published, we've got our 5 days, our clock starts, does it not? So, the level of information here isn't great from some of the departments. There are issues throughout where there are references to the Department for Transport, for example, they're taking that forward. That's fine, yeah. But we need to know what they're saying with regard to, again, implications for Northern Ireland. Think with regard to the blood issues, there's reference to, well, that there are processes and that's dealt with, but we need to have, again, some understanding of the process to know what our role is in that. Mm-hmm. And I think that, these things, I think we're all trying to tease out together, but I think it's important that the information is there to help us to establish, okay, these are the things that need to be on your radar, these are the things you may wish to consider having an inquiry on, these are the things that are going to have no import. We need that level of detail and that to be able to understand it. Mm-hmm. I don't want to be bogged down. Hyperlinks are important. The explanatory memoranda is vital, I think. Mm-hmm. And I note that in many circumstances the House of Lords and the House of Commons are saying those things. We're actually not. And yet we're supposed to, because the Secretary of State has given us assurances that this committee would be in receipt of those, would be in receipt of exactly the same information, and yet we don't have that. And I think that's a gap. That's key. I don't want to be bogged down in, we need to be able to make a quick assessment as to what it is and whether or not the impact is going to be significant. So I would appreciate if you would kind of take that on board going forward. And obviously somewhere in there, some indication of time frame. Yeah. Because that's going to be crucial to our work planning. With regard to, Tom, you had mentioned at the start, early engagement is key. And I think that that's right. You've also said that some of these things will shift as we reach a new mandate and the new Parliament determines its priorities. So how do we strike the balance there between flagging up, we need to look at this, versus allowing them space to determine what their priorities are? Or maybe it's just a case of we need to be ready, and certainly having looked at some of these things, I think some of them are fairly clear already, that we would need to be closely monitoring a number of those issues going forward. I'll pause there while you answer me on that one about how we strike the balance.
Yeah, I mean, in striking the balance, I think we don't have the commissions, the new commissions and new parliaments work programme. They're not there yet. You're probably towards the end of 2024 before you have that. You know, if we go back to the point at the start about a lot of these are technical in nature, I would assume a lot of those will continue in a new mandate. Because it'll reflect developments. You know, you've mentioned, for example, recycling in motor vehicles as part of that. That's not to preempt any decisions a new commission or new parliament might make in that regard. So I think it's still important we're actually looking at what's there on the programme at this minute in time. It was interesting, the comment around the kind of assessment of what really should we be looking at, where would the most major concerns be. It's something we've been thinking ourselves in terms of how do we engage on that when we look at the new programme as well. You know, so it's back down to that early as possible, but as early as possible we're starting to identify, well, actually these are the ones potentially we would be most concerned about. But as you work through the process, you could actually find by the time you get to consultation the issues have been addressed. So I wouldn't, a roundabout way of coming back to the question, I wouldn't dismiss the current programme that's there. I think there's a good strong chance a lot of that we would see continue into the next mandate. We can certainly go away, and I think this has been really, really useful for us, the feedback on the information that's presented and what you think you need. We can go away and we can look at that and we can work with departments around that, and I think come back to the committee on that. Okay.
Thank you. Chair, is okay if I ask a couple more things? Thank you very much for your indulgence. See, there's stuff there on page 16 where there's reference to legislation that will essentially come into effect the day after it's published. Where does that leave us in terms of our 5 days?
Is that a question?
It's the one about, it's the approval and market surveillance to 3-wheel type vehicles and quadricycles, bizarrely. But, you know, in circumstances where, I'm trying to figure out processes at this point. So in circumstances where it comes into effect the day after publication, where does that leave us?
Well, the 5 days only comes into effect if you're notified officially about it.
But this is the trouble with this, is that this is one of these ones where we haven't been given any indication of time frame. So that's what I'm talking about. You know, so in terms of process, if we don't know what the time frame is, but we're told it's going to be implemented after publication, we're up the creek. Sorry, colloquialism, but you know, this is why I suppose we're all trying to figure out what the processes are. I'm just working through. Obviously, the dental thing is hugely significant for Northern Ireland, and we'll come onto that in the course of our discussion later on, so I'm not going to go into that now. There are a number of things, I think, where we need to be clear what the UK is saying and where the UK is. So as part of the information that comes forward, I think on a number of these issues, working through both of the sets of papers, we need to know where the EU is, and some of that's clear, but timeframes are going to be key to that, but where the UK is and whether or not it is looking at diverging or otherwise. And obviously there are circumstances whereby they can copy and paste legislation, but they're free to adjust and amend as necessary, and it's helpful for us to have some understanding of that, and I think we're going to need it. Let me just see if there's anything else. Yes, with regard to page 28, if you'll just bear with me while I find it. which is about the plants. I presume to what extent does DAERA monitor this? And then where do we come in? And in circumstances where things are cross-cutting, Kerry, you'd mentioned there are a number of issues that kind of are going to hit everybody.
Mm-hmm.
We probably would be helpful if we had some understanding of the extent to which other departments were involved. And, well, just for information, can you tell us how is it determined who will take the lead?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing is back to the point. There's a lot of additional points there, clarification around the information required. And as I say, we'll pick that up with departments. Stephen, I might look to you in terms of the lead department coming out of ULITs.
Well, ULITs will identify all of those who have actually inputted that they have an interest in a policy area. So what you're talking about, your time frames and the 5-day turnaround, that is a constrained time frame for us to be able to find who the right persons are. So what we have is processes in place to make sure that everybody who has expressed an interest in any piece of legislation is identified. We will follow that up immediately with who the right persons are. In some instances, it will be for the Executive Office to lead a coordinated response back to yourselves from those interested parties, but it'll be on a case-by-case basis as they arise, because obviously some departments will have, within one department, maybe 3 or 4 different policy areas affected or interested, and it would make more sense because they have the lead in engaging with their UKG counterparts, that they would be the persons who would coordinate a response in that respect. So it will be on an individual basis, and we will be obviously honing the process as we move forward, with examples coming to ourselves from notifications received. So it is, ideally we would have a lead department on any given piece, but there are many instances where, on a reserve matter, for example, where there is a nominal lead department, but the interest would be not necessarily economy, for example, but DAERA. And I'm not giving you a definitive answer. We will have to learn as we move forward, and we are very, very conscious of the time frames, because as they hit, we've got a 2-day turnaround to get information back to the committee. We need to make sure that our processes are effective to get that information in.
Thank you. Chairman, just going forward, I'm trying to establish if at this stage do the officials need from us, from what we've seen today, which of these matters from our table we do want to continue to monitor. And I'm wondering too about, in terms of the further tables that will be brought forward, on what theme is the intention to bring them forward? Because I imagine it may be more beneficial to have them brought forward by time frame and then by department, if you know what I mean, rather than by department and then something's kind of buried in the further down the list.
I think the officials are pretty clear of, or at least hopefully clear of, what the committee requires, expects, and will want moving forward. I think we will have a discussion once the officials leave in terms of maybe following up with that writing, so that we are getting the information presented, so that then, Joanne, on the basis of what comes to us in a proper fashion, we can make those decisions about future monitoring. Yeah. So if everybody's content, I don't see any indication from anybody else either online or in the room. I just want to thank the officials, Tom, Stephen and Kerry, for coming along and allowing us to answer your questions and put our point of view to us. And as I say, we will be following up just in terms of writing with some specific requests about information moving forward. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
So, members, just given the nature of that conversation, and I think general agreement among all members, can I just seek agreement that that we do, as a committee, write through the Executive Office that a revised table of proposed EU legislation is provided covering all departments and including an nil return where it's relevant, and ensuring more consistent information is provided to include the name of and a link to the proposed EU Act under consideration, a link to the explanatory memorandum where available, an indication of whether the proposed EU Act is significant in terms of policy changes and the impact for here, an indication of the measures which proposed EU Acts officials anticipate will be adopted before the European Parliament election in June 2024. Essentially, the proper information, the more information, the impact and significance here, and the time frame.
Yeah, Chairman, if I could just add to that too. I mean, some of them there are saying, "Oh, this is a reserved matter," or some of them are saying that the Department of Transport's taking that forward and so on, and that's fine, but we need to know what that means, what they're doing. You know, how we factor into that, because there may be things. Because this is about us, and who knows us better than we do? So they may not know that there are implications for us. You know, there may be other kind of small minutiae, but it could be significant for us. So we need to know what is going on there as well, I think.
Yeah.
It's not sufficient to say DFT is going to take that. Right, well, what does that look like? What does it mean? What are they doing? You know what I mean?
So a description of what work has actually been undertaken.
Yes.
Just to give us peace of mind, because I completely understand what you're saying. It could have been dealt with through common frameworks, for example, and they're saying, look, you don't need to do anything more, it's okay, but just for us to have that extra comfort to know.
Yes.
Yeah.
So are members then content that we request that information off the Executive Office, and that we kind of don't take any further briefings until we get that back, and we can look at it and then assess and prioritise the work based on the proper information that comes our way?
Sure, I'm content with that, but also I just wanted to add on a separate but possibly related one. I hate to go back to this, but you know, we have asked them on a number of occasions now about capacity, and we get a varying response. That it isn't about capacity, it's also about capability. I completely understand that, I take that, but we also then get in the same breath, but additional would be helpful. So is it possible for us to actually ascertain, you know, if they are saying, look, we do think that there could down the line be the potential for extra capacity here. I'm just conscious of the fact that we're sat here at the minute, you know, we don't have a PFD formalised, as others have said, it's a compressed mandate already. We will be under pressure to deliver our own domestic priorities through each department, which will obviously be time bound and will be critical to the North. So for me, I just want to get to the bottom of it. I just want to understand if there actually is, you know, not an ask per se, because it's not their place, but it obviously is for us to interpret what they are saying. And I take it on advice that yes, it isn't just about having extra people in place, that people will need to have a feel for clearly what they're dealing with in terms of, you know, familiar with legislation, familiar with all the competencies required. But I feel that we haven't been able to get to the bottom of that over the last 4 weeks, and I just would be a wee bit more comfortable if we knew if there was something we could do to help if there is the need for more capacity.
So we did previously write in relation to raise and the capacity issue within the research department. I mean, I'm open to direction from members. We could write to the Executive Office and say that at a number of briefings that this committee has received, the issue of capacity and capability has been raised, and this is something that we would suggest they look at.
It's just so we know, just so we get clarity.
Okay.
You know.
Assessment of what's required and what action then is being looked at to fill that gap as well.
Okay. Yep, happy enough with that. Okay, members, just can I also then refer to the correspondence that we have received from the British Dental Association here in the north regarding a proposed EU Act which places a ban on mercury dental amalgam. I'm not sure if I should declare an interest as someone who has quite a few mercury dental amalgam fillings, but the BDA expresses concern that phasing out of the use of this dental amalgam by the 1st of January 2025 deadline would be deeply damaging to dental services here. So the British government has said it intends to phase down but not yet phase out the dental amalgam, so there would be obviously divergence on the use of a dental amalgam. The EU proposal amends an existing regulation which applies here under the Windsor framework. It is expected to be formally adopted by the EU in the near future, once published in the EU official journal. So we anticipate that it will be notified to this committee as a published replacement act. Therefore, can I ask members if they are content that given the anticipated notification in the very near future, that we representatives from the BD are invited to attend next week's meeting as part of an evidence gathering exercise ahead of any potential decision on whether the committee has an inquiry should the committee be notified of the published EU Act. Got David first and then Steve.
I certainly think that we should have them along the committee. I would say personal opinion is, having read the concerns and being aware of some of the effects, that there's more than enough here that we should be probably looking at launching an investigation into this at this stage.
Just not to cut across you, David, the committee can't launch an inquiry until we're notified, and we haven't been notified. So my suggestion is that in advance of the potential, yes, that we do some preliminary investigation work. It's not an inquiry because we can't do that, but we can.
But in preparation for that timeline.
Possibly.
So yeah, certainly, and whatever we call it, I think certainly we need to be looking into it at this stage. Yeah, so happy to have them along. And
okay.
First of all, Chair and the rest of the committee, apologies for being adrift. I was attending a meeting with the National Crime Agency this morning about cross-border crime and issues to do with that. Yes, I fully support what the Vice Chair says. I just think as well, because I think one of the wrinkles about this is we're going to also have to deal with, I think it comes under DERA for some strange reason. I think we also need to start contacting the department, so the department is aware, get their view on it, where it is, so we're ahead of the game when this regulation comes through.
Well, that was my next proposal. If people are happy that we do invite the BDA, we kind of preliminarily investigate the issue, and that we also then write to the Department of Health for its views on the proposed EU Act. I take your point. This is a point that Joanne asked. It's kind of cross-departmental, so it's under Department for Health.
it's because it's chemical. It's about mercury, because there's something in here about lamps as well, and so on.
And DERA do have responsibility. So we write to both departments for their views on the implications for the dental industry and wider society, and also ask what representations, if any, they have had from stakeholders other than the BDA, so that we're aware of other potential interested groups. That we also write to the British government to ask for its views on the proposed EU Act, including the position in other jurisdictions and associated timelines for phasing out of mercury dental amalgam. So that we're doing the preparatory work from these agencies in advance of us being notified, and then once we're notified, we obviously then can make a decision one way or the other.
And again, through the Chair, I think the House of Lords subcommittee might have also looked at this as well, or it's been raised by the House of Lords subcommittee. I think Bill Cash's committee's probably had something to do with it. So maybe behind the scenes, if the clerks and the team can reach out to see if stuff has already been started.
Well, you would imagine if we contact the British government that they will be assimilating that information and providing it.
No, it's separate for the the British government might be doing one thing, but the scrutiny's being done by the the House of Commons and the House of Lords. They're separate committees.
Okay.
Chairman, and this is my point. We have no notion what's going on. I appreciate we're going to meet them soon, but we've no notion what's going on. The Secretary of State promised that we would get the same information. I haven't seen it.
I think again, just for a wee bit of clarification, I think in the Secretary of State's letter, it's in reference to once we're notified. So once we're notified, he has committed to providing us with information. So at this point, we have, on this issue and on some of those other issues, we have yet to be notified. So there's a difference in what has to happen and what's statutory once notification happens, and the kind of preparatory work that we're doing here. Declan?
Yeah, I completely endorse that approach, Philip. That is the way to go. Notification is the starting point, but where something is brought to our attention, I think that the model you're outlining is the template for future reference, where we graduate our approach to gather information from stakeholders to have a clear view of the horizon, in anticipation then of a notification that would be received. And I think the approach you're suggesting would commend itself to other future cases as well, so that we don't, in the same way that you're proposing a preemptive approach, we don't end up preempting processes that actually are not live at this particular point in time.
Chair, Chairman, I concur entirely. I'm just slightly concerned about, there's clearly some work has already been done in other places. So I want to make sure that we're not duplicating and we can just get information from wherever that's going to help us along, because for all of us, it's about time frames.
Yep. Okay, so everybody's happy then. Can I just ask members if they are content? Oh, already done that. 6. Moving on then to item number 6. Just remind members that the Easter recess is from the 23rd of March to 7th of April, Easter Sundays on 31st of March. So in his letter to the Speaker dated 2nd of February, a copy of which is on page 31 of your pack, paragraph 9 refers that the Secretary of State pointed out that the committee may wish to request that notifications are paused for a given period while the Assembly is in recess, given that once we're notified then of a published act, the committee has a period of 5 days to decide whether or not to hold or continue to hold an inquiry. So we can't do anything other than that once we're notified. So I'm just alerting members, obviously there are 2 Thursdays during the Assembly recess period where the committee could possibly meet, Thursday the 20th of March and Thursday the 4th of April. Members will want to consider if they wish to pause notifications that would allow in principle for no meetings to be scheduled on one or both of those days. So in making a decision, I suppose we have to kind of think and be mindful that a pause in notifications then has the potential to shorten the 2-month scrutiny period afforded to publish act as the date runs from the publication to the official journal as opposed to the date notified. So I may wish to propose that the committee schedules a meeting on the 20th of March, which can be cancelled if no decisions need to be made or no evidence sessions are to be held or reports to be agreed on that day, but that the committee does not schedule a meeting for Thursday the 4th of April, which is Easter week, and the committee could of course meet if it becomes absolutely necessary. Steve?
Yeah, just for clarification, even if we decide not to take it, still the timelines are still set for when it's laid. So no matter what happens, the train is already leaving the station, whether we're here or not.
But we won't have to do the 5 days until we're notified. So we would essentially lose a week for what we do after that, if you know what I mean.
But sorry, again through the chair. But regardless of when we decide to look at it, the process has already started. So if we decide to delay it by 5 days, that's our problem. It's not the process which has already started. That's right. Okay.
Sure, I'm happy that we schedule for the 20th of March, and then if it becomes clear that it's not necessary, we can take action at the time. And probably if something comes forth on the 20th of March, we'll be able to inform our decision about the 4th of April.
Yeah.
But if we don't pause notifications, if we get notifications on the 20th of March, we have to meet on the... No, what I'm suggesting is that we write to the Secretary of State and say we don't want to receive notifications on the 28th of March.
Oh, I thought you were saying that we were happy to schedule a meeting for the 20th of March.
Yeah, it's scheduled a meeting for the 20th of March,
Yes.
which means if you get a notification on the 21st, you're making your decision on the 28th. But if you pause your notifications on the 28th, there's no decision for you to make on the 4th.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's
That's
funny
what
because
that's what we're doing, isn't it?
So
yeah. Yeah.
Might be worth looking at, it's just a thought, looking in the future about how the recesses of the European institutions align with our own, and how that will impact whether there be publications, because it, obviously we'll only get a notification on that basis, and therefore if having worked out in Europe, they take rather long recesses themselves, so there may be periods that we're not even really thinking about at the minute, where I suspect it's more likely than not that, if anything, their recesses will largely match ours, and if anything they'll be longer than ours, but it's worth be looking at and seeing how that maps out, in order that we know whenever they're down we're not going to be getting that publication in future.
That's a good idea.
So we're going to go ahead with that then, as suggested.
So, just for clarity, so if we receive a notification today, we have no choice but to instigate the 5-day rule and meet next week to make a decision on that. So what my proposal and suggestion is that we schedule the 28th to deal with anything that we may have got from the 21st.
Yes.
But if we don't get anything on the 21st and don't need to meet on the 28th, we don't meet on the 28th, but that on top of that, we write to the Secretary of State and say we don't want to receive any proposals on the 28th, which means then that we won't meet on the 4th unless something really out of the ordinary happens.
Yeah, that's
You're
fine.
happy with that?
Yeah, but I would also echo David's comments as well about the recesses, because I just don't want us to feel that we can do this all the time. I would much rather give the public the impression that we're, you know, we have no choice in this and we have to act whenever things come through. We can't always have the luxury of saying, oh, well, we'll choose not to take at this time. You know, I think we just need to grasp that reality as well.
Yeah.
Okay, and yep. So moving on then, number 7, correspondence. So a copy of letter, page 36 of the pack, from the House of Lords European Affairs Subcommittee on the Windsor Framework to the Minister of Biosecurity, Animal Health and Welfare regarding EU legislation 2031 on protective measures against pests of plants. Can I advise members that this is included in the table submitted by the Department of Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs that we discussed earlier. Can I ask members if you're content to note the correspondence at this stage and await a copy of the response from the Minister of Biosecurity? Content?
Yeah.
Will we get that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Item 7.2.
Sorry, apologies to the Chair. Does the Minister of Biosecurity know that they're supposed to inform us?
Well, I would imagine we'll get it through the EU,
Yeah.
the EU committee that contacted. We can just write to make sure.
Yeah,
that
if we could, because I mean, I've been contacted on this on a sidebar about something that somebody said, well, I didn't know about that, and I didn't know I was supposed to contact you, and then other people have said, oh, I thought your committee was dealing with it, which quite evidently we weren't. So, you know, there's a large degree of uncertainty about who needs to be talking to who.
Well, we'll just follow up and double make sure we get that response. Item 7.2, correspondence from the Committee on Procedures at page 38 of the pack, seeking views on potential priorities of work for strategic planning. Can I just advise members that while this committee has been established as a standing committee under the Windsor Framework Democratic Scrutiny Regulations, it isn't provided for in standing orders in the way that other standing committees are. Therefore, I am proposing that the Committee of Procedures is asked to take that matter forward and prepare a draft standing order for our consideration. Also, given the committee is likely to meet, just as the point Sorcia's made there, during periods of recess or perhaps more than once a week, that there might be merit in the Committee on Procedures exploring options that would provide in standing orders for substitute members of this committee and rules on substitution. Joanne?
Yeah, Chair, I think that's fair enough, but in addition to that, bear in mind that this committee may have to meet in summer and so on. It could be difficult enough to find substitutes, so I think could we also ask them to include in that to give consideration to proxy voting?
Okay, I'm happy with that.
Yeah.
So are members then content that we write to the chairperson and ask the Committee on Procedures to undertake this exploratory work for consideration by this committee then when complete?
So just a quick one, Chair. So are we asking them basically to put us on the same basis as the PAC with the add-ons that we've already discussed?
Go ahead.
really what we're asking them to do at this stage is that exploratory work. So they'll probably look at a number of different models, and then it'll be up to this committee to decide what model suits best.
Okay.
Happy enough?
Yep.
Okay. Chairperson's business? None. I don't have any. Any other business?
And so can I just clarify then? So once they've sent us through a new table,
Yep.
we are just going to work through these things one by one, are we? And give and establish where we are and what we're doing.
Well, I mean, the new table should provide the information that we want. So in terms of impact and time frame, and then obviously we will judge based on that what we may
Yeah,
or
but
may
what I
do.
mean is, in terms of a conversation about them, we're going to discuss them one by one, establish yes, no. These are the things these are our priorities.
We can discuss how we discuss them when we get them.
I'm kind of conscious at this stage. I mean, there's a list there. There's some things that have much more import than others, but obviously we don't know the full information yet. But what I don't want is we have this kind of open discussion as opposed to, right, let's just take it and work through what's important and what's not.
And I'm also conscious, members, that we haven't got a lot of notifications yet. Once notifications come our way, they will be our priority because we only have 5 days. So some of the work that we might think at this minute in time might be nice to do, we might not actually have the bandwidth, time frame to do it. So I think just put that in people's radar.
Also, if we were to get notifications in quick succession about that level of and diversity of issues as well, there'd be issues there. So actually understanding the workload it may create and clearly there are challenges in that. If there are things that need to be looked at an earlier stage, it's while not ideal, it's still preferable to being inundated with notifications that have to be dealt with within 5 days.
Yeah. And I mean, we've done an example of that with regard to the Dental Association. So,
yes.
I mean, if there's issues that we need to address before that, I mean, I'm pretty sure we'll do that.
Makes life easier for ourselves.
Okay, date, time, place of next meeting. So just members be aware, next meeting of the committee has been scheduled for next Thursday, 14th of March, 10 a.m. here in room 30. I just adjourn the meeting and ask the Secretariat to close the meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thanks.
Committee Room 30. Sound.